college, you should be doing that. And then find the things that will really motivate you long term, because you're going to work a lot of time in your career, and that should align with what you feel is impactful in your life. If it's something that just motivates you inherently and you can find that, then it just makes everything work out better.
Hi guys, welcome in. This is our 26th episode of MPods. We're here with John Seamans, the manager of the Michigan Biomedical Venture Fund. And I'm really excited about this podcast, and let's just jump right in. So John, can you walk us through a bit of what you do at the Michigan Biomedical Venture Fund and your story up to now?
Yeah, sure. Today, as the manager of the Michigan Biomedical Venture Fund, we work with spin-offs coming out of the university in the biomedical health space. So these are startups that come out of the research, advance, and see potential to create a product, a new medical device, a new therapy. And so as an investor, we look at the potential of that company as an investment and as a sort of clinically impactful product that could come out of it. And we evaluate whether that's a good investment or not at its core. And that's what venture investors do. The fact that we sit in the university, we have a more like supportive role and a role of how can we like ultimately build up this ecosystem around the university, which will improve the odds of success of any startup that's coming out of the research infrastructure. So we're evaluating companies, we're investing in them. Then after we invest, we're supporting them, which could be anything from strategic input. We might sit on the board of the company, anything from helping them find talent, helping them set milestones that we think are relevant and will help attract the next round of investment. And then using our network, which includes our advisory board, investors, industry experts, other entrepreneurs that can help them on their journey from tiny seed stage startup, hopefully to a very big, impactful company that's creating a new device or therapy that can impact patients. That's a biomedical engineering or Michigan Biomedical Venture Fund role.
Great, thank you for the overview. What do you think differentiates the Michigan biotech startup ecosystem from others like Boston or maybe San Francisco? What do you think makes Michigan special?
Yeah, one of the reasons I came back to the university after 17 years in the MedTech industry and startups is I saw this big opportunity because the university is incredible at churning out research. And I think the last numbers coming out of the Innovation Partnerships group that sort of measures total research output where we did over $2 billion in research last year, which I think is the number one public research institution. So we're doing all this incredible research, but it's a very different set of skills, expertise, and network to take the kernel of a startup, which is like a discovery and invention, and turn it into a company that will then end up creating a business that creates a product that takes it through all the regulatory path and ultimately has that big impact. When I look at the Michigan startup ecosystem, we are very good at creating those kernels of new startups. I think it was 600 new inventions last year. We spun out 28 companies, which was right up there in the top 3 to 5, along with MIT, Stanford. So we're good at creating those seeds of companies, but then you have to nurture them. You have to have this whole other network of industry talent, investors, entrepreneurs that can then pick up the ball and keep it moving forward. And that's where some of the challenges are in our ecosystem, because geographically co-located with the University of Michigan, we don't have a ton of biotech, medtech industry. And so what you end up needing to do is nurture those connections and build those connections, which are much easier now virtually than they were, say, a decade ago even. So the opportunities are there, but we have to facilitate that. And that's one of the reasons the university invested in venture funds like Michigan Biomedical Venture Fund and entities that try to connect our emerging projects with the business leadership and the talent that can run with it and go. And it doesn't have to happen here in Ann Arbor. In fact, a lot of the startups end up outside of our regional ecosystem. Of course, we preferentially want them to grow here, but number one is put them in the location where they're most likely to succeed, because that's our goal, is big impact from Michigan research.
Yeah.
Just a follow-up question, because you mentioned some of the challenges that are faced by biomedical startups. So do you think those challenges are unique to this industry, or it's like more shared challenges?
Yeah, there's like a baseline set of challenges that any new business has. Just to stand up a business and get it running and keep it running, and whether it's like disagreements between founders, or there's like a baseline set of risks. So it's all the ways a startup can go wrong, which exist for a tech startup, a SaaS startup, a new consumer product. But then like with biomedical startups, you add on, 20 other risks that are like deeply about the science, the clinical space, the regulatory path. So I'd say there's a lot of ways it can go wrong, unfortunately. And you also have to end up raising a lot more money. I think the ballpark numbers are, for any medical device, you're going to have to raise a minimum of like $20 to $30 million to get it through the FDA. For a new drug, when it's all said and done, it's going to be to $1 billion or something to get it through all these trials. The scale of capital that you need to attract and engage is like a whole other level of risk than, say, I can make this app and I can start selling it in months if I get the product right. So it's like a different sort of model for investment and risk that just has its own set of challenges.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Working in the atoms as opposed to bits can be a lot more difficult.
Yeah, cells don't always, it's taken, I think, longer to get, a cell to behave the way you want versus, just bits that deterministically define how you want it to behave.
But yeah, that's fascinating, that turning a kernel into something and just fostering that and growing it. But I'd want to take us back to your undergrad at Michigan, and then you did your master's at Michigan as well. And then you moved on to GE Healthcare. And I'm just curious, could you take us back to those days in university? And I'm curious, what were you like in university, and how is that different than how you're today? And could you also walk us through some of the experiences that you had at Michigan?
And you've taken me back down memory lane.
Yeah. Do you ever think that you'll become a venture capitalist?
Yeah, exactly. It's funny because I literally on my way into the Lurie Biomedical Engineering building, I just ran into my niece, who's a freshman here. We pried her away from her Notre Dame family, which is her uncle's influence, and she came to Michigan. So that sort of takes me back, watching her experience, getting into college, all the stuff of being a freshman, all the exciting new things, but also all this coursework you're balancing. Anyway, it's a step down memory lane. So what was I like? I didn't wear suit jackets. And you see me in this, I don't wear this every day. I was over at the hospital, and you tend to look nicer when you're over there interacting with clinicians. So number one, I was super technically focused. I was very into building things, technology. As an engineer, it was like a natural thing that the kid that loved building stuff with Legos and tinkering and taking things apart. It was always that's what kind of made me click and drove me. And then because I wanted something challenging, I thought, electrical engineering school, I like to code and play with computers. So then I got into Michigan, and I got into the coursework, which was interesting and challenging, and in some aspects were fun. But then I got a couple of years in, I got a little bit disillusioned, I would say, because you're looking at what am I going to do with these skills and thinking about where am I going to intern, what am I going to do? And a lot of the jobs were do you want to design a computer chip or a new cell phone? And I was not inherently motivated by that stuff. So I started seeking out what might be something I could see myself working on for longer. Because in general, you're going to, as an engineer, really anybody is going to spend a lot of time in their career and a big chunk of their life doing that. So it's it better be something that motivates you and you think is inherently valuable and is somewhat fun for you to work on, or else it's going to be a long road in your career. So that got me thinking about these other options. So I was exploring what are the medical type applications that I can do with a foundational EE degree. One summer, I sent out a cold email to probably 5 or 6 faculty at the university. Hey, do you have a summer job for someone that knows signal processing and can do some MATLAB? The one person to respond was a professor named Jeff Fessler, who's still here at the university, who I still keep in touch with. And he responded, hey, I've got this position, summer funding in medical imaging. That was my foray into medical applications of engineering. So I'm giving you a very drawn out story here, but this is a path. And from there, to be honest, that little email reply, which was oh, great, I have something to do, then built the foundation of a skill set that I then applied in an internship at GE Healthcare, which then led to a full-time position in their leadership development program, and then led to more interest in the clinical applications, like the convergence of technical product design and how are the clinicians going to apply it. So, and that sort of cascaded through my career of like understanding deeply both the technical side, but then also how is this product used clinically? What is the problem it's actually solving? And translating between those worlds, which again, I still get to do today, where I'm meeting with engineering researchers and clinicians. Often these teams are a combination of technical expertise, clinical expertise, and business expertise. So I've got us most of the way there. There's other pieces to the story, but I'll stop just to keep it concise.
No, but just to double click on that. So at some point you realized, I really want to go into, instead of working on like a phone or something, I want to work on medical technology. Was that a gradual shift, or were there moments that were very critical in determining this is what I want to do?
Yeah, I think I'd always thought about those applications, but you're also practical when you're thinking about what job opportunities. So I did some interviews, maybe, I think it was my sophomore year. You like go to the career fair, you put on like this suit that doesn't fit that I borrowed from my roommate, and you go talk to a bunch of companies. So it was like Caterpillar and Motorola and like Microsoft. And so you like talk to them and you might get a screening interview, and then it makes you think about what would my life be like if I went off and did this? What if I rose through the ranks at Microsoft or something? Do I see myself there? And so I think those little things nudged me toward, I'm much more interested inherently in the medical applications, which then led me to pursue opportunities there, which led me to then get a master's in biomedical engineering to cement that like differentiated path from general engineer that could work in a bunch of careers to say, I'm going this route and I'm only interested in the medical stuff. Even if it limits my options, it's what will make me motivated and excited.
I see. And was there a moment that you knew this is what you wanted to do, or is there something? Or
yeah, that's a good question. I get what you're getting at. I think the first actual job I had in that role cemented it, because in school you're doing a lot of theory. It's hard to know like what the actual job is about, because you're learning theory. There's some project-based stuff that relates more to what you do in industry. But then my first role in the summer at GE Healthcare, working with this cross-disciplinary team. We were like engaging with radiologists at hospitals. And this interface role between engineering and clinical application was like, this is so cool. I could do this for my job. And I guess that's the turning point when I was pretty sure, okay, I know the path I want to sort of pursue. But yeah, within these, there's always like multiple paths you can go. Because there was, in fact, like the work I mentioned over the summer with an engineering lab that was doing medical applications, that work like wasn't really super exciting to me. It was still like we were simulating image reconstruction, and we were like making reconstructions of spheres. It was like reading very deep inverse problems in math, and I could do that stuff, but it wasn't like fun for me. It was like, it felt like too much work. So what's adjacent to this, and do I like that? And so you keep exploring.
So at GE, there's a moment where you're like, I really like what I'm doing here. I want to. So then after GE, you went on to work as the director of clinical engineering at Delphinus Medical Technologies. So what was the journey of Delphinus, and what's the story of the company and how you worked with them?
So I'd gotten married. I was back in Ann Arbor because my wife was starting her residency and then ultimately fellowship here at Michigan. And so I was working remotely for GE Healthcare. I was getting involved to know what's going on in this ecosystem and seeing what other companies are involved. And so I met this team that had just spun this project out from a university prototype and had raised some venture capital. And it was a team with a researcher, a professor in medical physics, a radiologist, a co-founder, and then a bunch of PhDs from the lab that had worked on this, and now we're moving it forward. And I came in and they're like, you're an industry person. I I was like now the experienced industry person. So like, can you join us and help us turn this into a real product? And so that was the start of a fairly long journey of like, how do you take something out of a lab and make it reproducible, make it robust, take it through all the regulatory processes, the clinical trials, through the FDA, ultimately, which was a 10,000 patient breast cancer screening trial, and learning all of the near-death experiences that startups face along the way, all the challenges, whether it's technical, clinical, interpersonal, leadership challenges. It's just, there's so many, startups are so hard, and so many, it gave me a very deep respect for how hard this stuff is, and then also how critical like the linchpin of the leadership at a startup is. It's like the glue that holds the team together. It's the person that's able to attract new talent by sharing a vision for like, why should you be crazy enough to join this small company when you could join any number of other sure bets, large companies that will pay you a great paycheck right now, and you're going to take on a bunch of risk to do something that's more unknown.
Is this like how you pivot to the Biomedical Venture Fund like experience later? Because it's like really like building up from a small kernel to like something big, all the way past to FDA approval.
Yeah, that definitely was, because once I saw, and I'd been always exploring this, like even when I went for my first job out of school, I was looking at startup companies, but the advice I got was like, startups can be really good experiences or really bad, because it just depends on the mentors you're going to find and the leadership there. So you could join a startup and it can be an amazing experience, or you can join a startup and it could be a total dumpster fire of a mess where you don't have direction and leadership. And so I ultimately chose the big company, and that was good because there was a lot of structure and training, which somebody new needs. And then I was able to bring that to the startup. But yeah, to your question, once I realized that startups are doing the really innovative, disruptive, to use that overused word, things, whereas a big company like GE Healthcare is going to often make much more incremental decisions based on what's in the market right now, what's our competition doing, let's do this small tweak. The advantage there is like the stuff you work on immediately goes out into the world. It might be on thousands of like medical imaging systems. The code you wrote or the update or the feature you added. In a startup, it's years before it's going to get it through the FDA and get out to users. So what really led me to shift was getting to know our investors, getting to interact with our board, and thinking this is an interesting role. You get to work with multiple companies at once. The other piece was our CEO, a guy named Mark Forche, was just an incredible leader, incredible mentor. It motivated me to go back for a part-time MBA to round out my skills, because if I was going to be effective, to see someone like him in action that really understands the business side, the leadership side, the investment side. If you want to be an effective startup leader, you better have all those skills in your tool belt. And so seeing him in action sent me back for that part-time MBA, which also got me direct venture experience, and then ultimately positioned me for this role.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's so. You mentioned mentors were crucial in the development. I'm curious, do you have any mentors that you particularly really learned from or admired, and how do you think that changed how you operate on a day-to-day basis? Some of the mentors that were critical in your development.
Yeah. So I'll pick out a couple. One, and I already mentioned him, and it's not that I interacted with him a ton, but you just pick up these kernels that like stick in your head and keep playing as you go through your career. And it's so Jeff Fessler, who I mentioned I worked for in my first position at the university. I remember him saying, hey, like I asked him, what's your advice as I go out in my career? And he had it was an industry magazine on his desk. And he is super well-renowned in medical imaging and image reconstruction. He said, you really need to understand the clinical application if you want to go far. He's like, he expressed that that's one thing that maybe he hadn't done early and now opened his eyes. And so he said, always deeply understand like how what you're working on as a technical person impacts the end user, which in this case, and in biomedical engineering is all about clinical impact. And so he's like, make sure you deeply understand that. Served me very well. So whenever I worked on something, I understood how to be fluent in like the clinicians that were using it, the end users, what are the clinical indications and problems that are being solved there. So he was a great mentor. when I went to GE, I had a project leader named Melissa Bass, who she was only like 2 years ahead of me, but she was somebody that I saw her in action. She was always looking out for even new team members. She was building her own career, and a lot of people are just focused on what they can do for themselves and seeking the mentors that can help them position. But she was actually reaching back to help the people that were just barely junior to her. And I was like, wow, like this is like a great way to operate. So seeing her, and she was always looking out for those team members and giving them advice. So she was very helpful and always advocating for people, even though a lot of people early in their career are just trying to advocate for themselves. So seeing that has been impactful and something I think about a lot. And then I mentioned Mark, who was the CEO at the breast cancer screening startup I was part of, who I still keep in touch with these days, who just, when you see somebody, you want to keep in touch with them. That is just such a force of nature, and somebody that's so good at what they do. You want to learn all these tidbits and things you can. One other piece of advice that stuck in my mind that Mark gave me is, we're all very busy in what we do, whether we're students or whether we're business operators. And I'm always like, oh my gosh, we have so much to get done. If you're in a startup, like you're literally like trying to do 100 things, you're stretched super thin. But always remember, like, people want to work with people they care about and connect to personally. In business, you always have that choice. Investors have that choice of who they want to work with. Team members have that choice of what team they join. And so always make sure you take that time to like personally connect to people. Even if you're busy, even if you think the purpose of this meeting is to get this one thing done, pause and check in and be like, how's everybody doing? Ask about their family. Like, genuinely, it's not to pretend you care, but it's actually get to know them a little bit. So then the next time you connect, and because that's ultimately in the world what is going to keep people wanting to work with you over time. So never be too busy to make those little connections.
So you mentioned at Delphinus that you struggled a lot and had a lot of, and you also just mentioned the importance of having a cohesive team and having, a collaboration. What could you describe the times at Delphinus when you needed to rely on having a connected team, and when you really needed collaboration because of problems that were just coming, whether technical or otherwise? Can you describe the moment that you come across a problem and you're like, wow, this is a really difficult problem?
Yeah, I think like in any startup, you're going to encounter those, and especially in a technology startup where you're working on something super cutting edge, like a system that no one had fully developed before. There was a prototype that could do most of what we needed it to do. But so every problem you encounter might be like a little miniature PhD project. So it intensifies these challenges. And what's interesting in a startup is the answer of like, this isn't solvable. It doesn't exist, because then you just say, if it's not solvable, then we literally pack up and we all go home. And so it's like you're presented with a problem and you're like, we'll find a way. And one of those was like, there was a really advanced image reconstruction method that really enhanced the images, but it was like viewed as something much further out. And because it took days to reconstruct the image versus what we needed was like minutes. But in parallel, all of the technology was advancing, GPUs from NVIDIA, things like that. And in parallel, the team could look at speeding it up. So that was one of those challenges. We figured out that to get to the sensitivity we needed in terms of image quality, we had to take on this much more advanced, complicated, computationally intensive image reconstruction technique. So it was like Tiger team forms, figure out all the expertise you needed, figure out are there consultants we can pull in. And so this team, which I worked adjacent to then as part of the engineering team, was like laser focused on how do we get this down. I remember our engineering director at the time, every day he would write the image reconstruction time on his like glass door of his thing. It was like watching this progress from days to hours to minutes to in thinking creatively about where can we use hardware to speed this up? How can we do this in parallel? How can we anyway, that was one of the many challenges, an example of a team coming together. But I think it's like setting a mentality that you can't say we can't do this. There's always a way to do this. You might have to make trade-offs along the way, but it's doable. So I think that's what's fun about startups is there's like, you're setting a goal and it's aggressive and there's always a way. It may require more resources. It may require more time, but you can pull all those levers. And if you're a good leader, let's say you need more investment, then you go to your investors and you make your case of why more money will speed this up or open up a new opportunity. If you're motivating a team, then you try to get them to think creatively and not constrained about, no, we can't do this. So that's a much more fun and exciting environment. And it's harder to replicate that in a large company.
And another thing, I need to ask, when you encounter a problem and it's dark and it doesn't seem like you can solve it, and you're thinking of packing up, and it's that really, it's that really dark moment.
We might just go get lunch and make sure we're not just feeling angry or something.
What's the motivation there? Like, what gets you out of bed in the morning? I'm curious to go and try and solve these really difficult problems.
Yeah, I think everybody finds their own motivation. Some people in startups are just motivated by the competition of it, like they're competitors. They're like, I'm going to win at this. I'm going to destroy the competition. And that is like what drives them. And some people are just driven that way. I think for me, like more like when I was in particular there, when I was like faced with, oh my gosh, this is going to be so hard. Are we going to even get this done? Are we going to make it? My sister had breast cancer at a very young age. And so like in the back of my mind, when I thought about that, it was like, this is worthwhile. This is something worth putting my time and energy. It's not just some arbitrary technical problem we're trying to solve. It's very real. It's very impactful. There's potential patient lives, cancers that could be detected earlier. And so that's like a pretty fundamental motivation. Find your why within that. And it could come from a number of things. It could be, I'm part of a team and I don't want to let that team down, and we're all in this together, and it's our livelihood, it's our jobs, and so we're going to find a way. And it's always like it's a combination of these things for a lot of people, but I would say that's a pretty, finding that motivation will allow you to knock down those walls when your back's against the wall. It'll give you that extra push to not throw in the towel.
I see. It's very personal for you. So do you see that you could tell, like, based on someone's work, whether it's based on competitiveness or whether it's based on personal achievement, or do you think you can tell based on someone's actions, like their motivation for working? And how do you think your own motivation has changed how you work?
Yeah, I guess you're trying to, like, when you're interviewing someone or thinking about adding them to your team, you do want to assess what's motivating them. And is it something that's well aligned with that job, or is it something they're going to chase? Sometimes you see people jump from industry to industry, and maybe they're chasing the hot new trend and where the money is. And so they may not have the staying power when back against the wall, it gets tough. They might jump to the other thing because it's not. I have found within medical technology, in the biotech industry, a lot of people are driven by those. Fundamentally, they want to work on something that they feel is meaningful and matters and positively impacts people, versus other industries. Sometimes it's more driven to succeed at business, win, and financial incentives, which always play a role to some level, but might be more at the forefront for somebody that's in a pure tech software startup that's competing in a very intense industry where it's more about, I want to beat the competition. Did I cover I forget exactly the question.
No,
but it's hard to assess, but I think you want alignment of that, because that relates to the mission of your organization and sort of the vision of what you're doing. If people are all there, and there can be like slight misalignment, but if people are all there motivated by very different things, then I don't know, it can be messy, because you want everybody on the same page as far as like why you're all there and what's the motivation. And setting that in any organization is important. It's even more important in startup, because you're trying to create glue that holds this thing together, which is, startups are often very loosely held together. There's a team and a leader, but it's a small team. So if you lose a couple key people, then it can be really detrimental to the organization. So what glues everybody together, set that vision, and hopefully you attract people that are all motivated by that. For instance, if they get an offer for more money somewhere else, they're not immediately going to jump ship because there's something more intrinsic about what they're doing and why they're there that keeps them involved.
Yeah. Also, we're seeing something pretty incredible happening with technology. What biomedical or technological advancements related to healthcare most excite you in the next 5 to 10 years?
Cool. Yeah, I think we're at like this golden age of technology being applied to healthcare. It was already applied to so many other industries, and in pockets it's been successful in healthcare, but I think in the next decade there's going to be a lot of areas where the advancement in computing power and AI actually comes to fruition in healthcare. And I think a lot of that is around, a lot of people talk about personalized medicine. I think we're at the point where we can act upon more of that. And as like narrow examples, it could mean the ability to non-invasively monitor any number of personal attributes, vital signs, characteristics, and turn that into something actionable, and do that whether it's through a cell phone or sort of non-invasive home-based monitoring, to actually turn out that stream of data into something useful. And now you also have, I don't know the number, but there's just constantly hundreds and hundreds of new, say, cancer therapeutics in the pipeline and in clinical trials. And so there's now, where there used to be maybe just a handful of options to treat a patient, there's cell and gene therapies, there's immunotherapies, there's traditional chemotherapy. And so the convergence of more options, the ability to then match those in a personalized way to patients, that will unlock a lot of new opportunities in healthcare. And I will say, although I work on this super advanced new tech, biotech, sometimes we like overcomplicate health, because the biggest gains are like a lot of preventative stuff, nutrition, exercise, like sleep, and like advanced technologies won't save you the way those basic things can. And we throw so much technology and money at treating things after it's a problem. But most of the efficiency probably will come from public health measures, policy, cultural changes, food we subsidize. And so although I work on all this stuff that's like very cutting edge, high tech, I'm also realistic that a lot of the big advances in health are these upstream preventative things. So
Yeah, I would totally agree, because a lot of that, like when it comes to if a patient goes see a doctor, that's probably the last resort. I feel miserable. What can you do to save me? Or what can we do to alleviate that?
It's sick care.
Yeah, that's like at the end resort. Okay. And doctors are probably thinking, what can we do to save it? What's the risk? And they need to probably inform the patient, family, and what's the last resort. Yeah.
And I think overall, like in my career, coming from this like very deep technical starting point, you start to realize like a lot of the bigger challenges and problems are outside of technology and science. They're almost like interpersonal, psychological, like whether it's like person's motivation, it's like, can you make the right choice in terms of eating and like habits and things. And that applies whether you're like in your own personal life or like building a team that's going to be high performing. There's a lot of like psychology involved that even in my like day-to-day role of assessing companies or working with companies, there's so much of it that's like very non-technical but very important about, whether it's like convincing a startup founder that they need to bring in a business lead and it's not them, having them agree with that could be like a turning point for a company. And that's nothing to do with the science or the tech. It's all like interpersonal, like navigating those things. And then as we talk about, the biggest impacts to public health probably come from sort of cultural shifts and getting people to change behavior, which is hard to do through technology. So anyway, it's like I'm going off the rails now, but it's really interesting that a lot of the impact is well outside the technology won't save us. It's sort of the bottom line.
Just thinking about the food tester that's out there in the US and how expensive some fresh food can become, I feel like it's definitely a public health issue and we don't talk about them enough, I feel like. Yeah, definitely I agree with.
Yeah, I think SNAP is currently subsidizing Coca-Cola and Doritos and other things.
So I guess the broader takeaway is at the university, we have all these really bright students and people thinking about how they can impact the world. It's like, don't get too deep in your silo, because there's a lot of ways to make an impact, and smart people will be able to think about those problems. But don't pigeonhole yourself in some silo and say, I'm just the technical person. Think about these things, because there's probably some interesting convergence between the way you can impact behavior through technology. We've seen whether it's like phones and social media change the way people are thinking and behaving in a big way, and probably some really interesting changes in health, back to your original question, could come from people that figure out how to unlock that intersection of technology, human behavior, helping steer behavior to the right choices without infringing on people or feeling very big brother-ish about how they do it.
I see, like getting the incentives right to align. But yeah, so I want to be very respectful of your time here, because I know, do you know what time we're at?
So we're at 2:40. We're about 40 minutes.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I want to just be respectful. We do have a lot of questions, but yeah, I mean, if we can get to them. But would you guys want to ask a few?
We could do 5 more minutes, maybe.
Yeah, five more.
Yeah.
I feel like we've covered a lot of ground. It's been good.
I think so.
I guess like this question. So what advice do you have for students or young people in general? Maybe like for people in your field, or just generally when they're like exploring their career.
Yeah, I think to some of the stuff I've already covered, like that, explore things, try out a lot of things. That's in college, you should be doing that. And then find the things that will really motivate you long term, because you're going to work a lot of time in your career, and that should align with what you feel is impactful in your life. If it's something that just motivates you inherently and you can find that, then it just makes everything work out better. And yeah, I know that's ambiguous advice. What else? Let's see.
Here, if I might specify, so there are a lot of people that think, oh, I'm not a technical person, or oh, I'm not this, I don't have this skill set or something. What would you say to those people of how they might be able to contribute in a medical technology sense?
Yeah, I think as you explore things and find things that you like, I would love to do this, or you see somebody in a role and you get to know them, or you sort of shadow, or like you try out a career in some way, and I want to get to here, but I'm over here. Like there's always little intermediate stepping stones to get there. And so it's not like a fake it till you make it, but there's always ways to be like, take one first step. And maybe it's like a volunteer role, or hey, I'm going to explore this on my own. I'm going to take an online course. I'm going to take, if you're out of school. And so you like stepwise get there and add those skills. And then when the opportunities come, you'll have some baseline. For instance, I get a lot of students that say, I want to get into venture. What can I do? Do you have any roles? Or I couldn't get the internship in venture. And then I'm like, what else have you done as a stepping stone? And some have I took these 2 courses. I participated in a student venture fund, and I took, venture capital university online. And so, okay, they did all these steps. And then there's other people that are like, I just can't break in. I was like, what step have you taken? And they're like, nothing yet. And so it's like hard to be convinced that they're putting the effort in to get there. So I guess the larger point is just find those little steps to get there. One thing, this isn't exactly on that, but when I was early in my career, I was very bad at presenting. Public speaking frightened me, as it does with a lot of people. And so I was I saw leaders that could get up there and converse and captivate a room and pitch their idea really well, which is what you need to be able to do to harness the resources you need. And so I was how can I practice this? So I was deathly afraid, but I signed up to present at, it was nerd night. There was people presenting to a room full, just a topic. And then I signed up to come back and give a guest lecture. I reached out to a professor and was hey, I'd love to come back and speak to your class. And they were that would be amazing. So then every year I was going back to speak in front of a class of 40. And slowly that helped me get better. And so I think that's just a small example of find ways to exercise those skills that you don't have whether maybe it's a technical skill and you're trying to build that because you're like LSA sort of non-technical major. And so you can always build those skills if you're willing, and then just exercise them, find those opportunities. But then things happen through those interactions by putting yourself out there.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I would love to ask a lot, maybe a fun one. Maybe just, do you have any hobbies or fun things you like to do in your very limited free time?
Yeah, I have 3 young kids. My wife works full-time as a physician, so I don't get a lot of hobbies. But the one thing I will fight tooth and nail to not give up is like I play hockey, ice hockey once a week. And even if the game is at 11:30 at night and I'm going to get home at 1 o'clock and not be able to sleep till 2 and then I have a meeting at 8, I'm still going to do it because I have to do that. It's like the time, my fun time. My hobbies mostly involve stuff my kids want to do now, so like going to a lot of like soccer games, volleyball, basketball, which is still fun. And then I definitely play Legos. It's so fun. It's great, like full circle. And then I also I used to do this a lot more, but I like to build things. I have a shop at home. I do during COVID, I was building furniture. I built a desk because my kids were at home and needed another desk. And so I love working with my hands because I like to build as an engineer, but my work now does not involve really building anything other than spreadsheets, documents, and PowerPoints. That's how I get my outlet for the building. And we'll try to come up with crazy little projects too. For Halloween, my daughter was like, we should build some kind of booby trap for our porch. And we designed something that would drop a spider and got an Arduino and did some really little programming. So I'm infiltrating, they're putting them on the engineering path from an early age.
Well, that's really great. And I want to thank you so much again for coming on and sharing what you shared. So yeah, it's been a great interview, and I can't wait to go over the recording and really think about what you said.
It was fun. Thanks for letting me ramble on for 45 minutes.
Thank you.
See ya.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.